Okay, these notes are about scientific notation. Okay, so in scientific notation, numbers are written as powers of 10. So in scientific notation, only one number, and remember, zeros are not numbers, but one number between 1 and 9 is before the decimal. So you can have 5 different numbers, but it should be like 1 point something, 2 point something, 3 point something, 4 point something, 5 point something. You get the idea, up to 9 point something. There is no 10 point something because that's, you move the decimal over one more for 1 point something. Large numbers, which means if they're greater than 1, the exponents will be positive. Small numbers, if the number is less than 1, exponents are negative. Okay, so now let's write 621 million, I think that's what that is, in scientific notation. Okay, so we need to move the decimal. So when you write a number, if it doesn't have a decimal, like something like this, you're going to assume the decimal is at the end, even though it's not really written with it. And in sig figs, obviously there would only be 3 sig figs, blah, 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 but we're not talking about that now. So in scientific notation, you have to move the decimal. You're going to write it as a power of 10, and that includes all the spaces. So basically the first thing you're going to do is put a decimal point at the end. And you want to get the decimal point right here. So we're going to move it from the end to there, and we're going to see how many spaces that decimal point moves. That's going to tell us what our power of 10 is. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So to go from the end to there, it's 8 spaces. So now this number is 6.21. And by the way, at this point in time, we don't write down the other zeros. Okay, so it's 6.21 times 10 to the 8th. Because if you look at 621, this number right here only has 3 sig figs. Okay, so since there is only 3 significant digits or 3 sig figs, your scientific notation number can only have 3 sig figs. And if I were to write it 6.210, that's 4. So you can't do that. Okay, we have to have 3 sig figs. Okay, so 621 times 10 to the 8th. Okay, so now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to take a number that's smaller than 1. Okay, so if you notice, this number is much smaller than 1. So our exponent, our exponent is going to be negative. Just keep that in mind while we're doing this. Okay, so we're going to move the decimal from where it is to right after the 3. Okay, right there. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is 3.21 times 10 to the minus 6. Once again, we're also worried about sig figs. And here, remember, you start from the first number and count right. So there's only 3 sig figs in this number, so there should only be 3 sig figs in your scientific notation number. So it's not 3.210, although I don't think you'd get that from this anyway, but yeah. So it's just 3.21. Okay. Now, sometimes numbers are not in scientific notation, but they are with a power of 10. These numbers need to be put into scientific notation. So we're going to follow these rules. After these rules, by the way, I'm going to show you a little shortcut. So hopefully you understand it better, but here's the rules. If you move the decimal to the left from where it is, you add to the exponent. If you move the decimal to the right, you subtract from the exponent. Okay, so now we're going to take 396 times 10 to the 4th and actually put it into scientific notation. At first glance, you're thinking, oh, well, it already is in scientific notation. But it's not, because there's no decimal point. So, and remember, the decimal point has to be between the first 2 numbers. So we're going to rewrite this, 96. I'm going to put the decimal point at the end, because basically that's what this number is. So now you can tell it is definitely not in scientific notation, because the decimal point has to be right there. So we're going to go 1, 2. So 3.96. Now I moved it left, so I'm going to add. So it's 3.96 times 10 to the 6. Now there is another way, And I don't know if it's any easier or not, but it's doable, and that way you can use the calculator with it. If you put this in the calculator, you put 396 times 10. Now, some calculators use the caret. Some calculators use y to the x. So whatever way your calculator has of doing exponents, this is what you do. Now, when you put this in the calculator, you're going to get 396 with 4 zeros after it. Now, this number you can just totally convert to scientific notation. So we're going to take the decimal there. We want to go there. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3.96 times 10 to the 6th. Okay. So either way, if you can't remember whether to add or subtract, just stick it in the calculator. And that works too. Now, what if your number is like super, 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 super huge? I mean, like 396 times 10. Here, let's pull this up a little bit. So what if it, oh, hang on. I'm having troubles with my thing. Okay, what if it's something like 396 times 10 to the 25? Okay. Well, when you put that into the calculator, so you hit 396 and then you hit times 10 and use your little caret to the 25, it puts it in to scientific notation. Now, it does come out, most of them use the E, so it says 3.96 E27. Well, that means 3.96 times 10 to the 27th. And that's the same as adding. You would have done the same thing. Add 25 plus 2. Ooh, you can't really tell my 27, can you? Well, that's 27. Okay, so that's another way of doing it. So if the number is pretty big, in fact, if it's over 8 or 9, I'm not sure, it depends on the calculator, it will actually put it into scientific notation for you. It's the smaller numbers that you actually have to convert yourself. Okay, so now let's look at 0.0921 times 10 to the 5th. Obviously, that's not in scientific notation because the decimal's not in the right place. So we're going to rewrite the number 0.0921 times 10 to the 5th. Now we're going to move it. This is where we want to go. So 1, 2. We moved it to the right, so we're going to subtract. So we get 9.21 times 10 to the 3rd. You can also do the same thing with the calculator. You put this in the calculator. So you put in 0.0921 times 10 and use your caret or y to the x or whatever, and you'll get 9210. Well, 1, 2, 3. 9.21 times 10 to the 3rd. Now, what if the number is bigger than like the 5? I mean, that's pretty easy. You're going to subtract. If the number is pretty big as far as times 10 to the whatever, so for example, let's do 0.0921 times 10 to the, let's say, negative 12. Okay. Now, you can, if you remember what to do with moving it, it's probably easiest to move it. So you just move it over, subtract 2. So 1, 2. So minus 2. So you'd have 9.21 times 10 to the negative 14. Whoops. Oh, here, I always forget. I'm coming across the end of my screen. So negative 14. Now, you can do this in the calculator too. It does the same thing, only it will give you the answer. So if you put in 0.0921, so you put 0.0921 times 10, use your little caret or y to the x, negative 12, it comes out 921, just like the other one, 9.21 e negative 14, which means 9.21 times 10 to the negative 14. That's what that e negative 14 means. E means times 10. Okay. So that's the easy way of doing it. I think, I don't know, either one's easiest depending on, depends. Some people like to just subtract because it's easier for them. Other people just like to use the calculator. Whichever one works for you, that's the one you use. Okay, now we're going to talk about putting numbers into standard notation. That involves moving the decimal and adding zeros to those spaces, or just adding the proper amount of zeros before or after the numbers. Usually if you have a positive exponent, you're going to add the zeros to the right. That way, so that you have the same number of digits after the first number as the exponent. They don't all have to be zeros. If you have a negative exponent, you're going to add one less zero than the exponent number. Sort of. I'm going to show you a little shortcut so you don't, because sometimes that's hard to remember, that you have to go one less to put the decimal point in. So there's a little shortcut, but when we get to it, I'll show it to you. Okay, so let's do 6.21 times 10 to the 5th into standard notation. Now, sometimes the calculator works. So if your exponent is less than probably 8, it depends on your calculator. A lot of calculators will put it into standard notation for you. So if you hit 6.21 times 10, little caret 5, it gives you the right number, 621,000. So 621,000. But if it's bigger than a certain number, usually 8 maybe. Yeah, usually 8, because I think there's only 8. However many digits there are on your calculator, it could be 8 or 9. It'll keep it into scientific notation. So then you have to do it yourself by hand. So to do that, you're going to take your, so we're going to start with the 6.21. Now, we are going to add zeros until, or actually, we're just going to move spaces and then fill in the blank spaces with the zeros. We are going to move to the right. This number times 10 to the 5 is positive. So we have to move the decimal to the right, because remember, the number is going to be bigger than 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 0, 0, which is 621,000, comma. Okay. And that's pretty much it. Now, obviously, if it was like 6.21 times 10 to the 12th, you can't use your calculator. You got to keep on going, doing the little spaces until you've hit 12. Okay. Okay. So 3.01 times 10 to the negative 5. Now, this one, if you put into the calculator, it's going to give you 3.01 times 10 to the negative 5. The calculator does not like to do the negative exponents the way it does the positive exponents. So you really can't put it in the calculator. But you can move the decimal. There's 2 ways of doing this. And some students like both, one way, and some students like the other. So if we have 3.01, if it's negative, we're moving to the left. So we're going to go 5 places to the left. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put our decimal there, and then fill in the blank with zeros. Now, this is fine if there's 5. If there's more than that, you might get kind of confused of how many spaces you're going. I have a little simpler solution. We are going to put 5 zeros in front of that 3. So we are going to strictly go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then add my 301. And I'm going to put my decimal point right there between the first 2 zeros. Okay. Now, double check yourself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Guess what? We did it right. This way, to me, this just seems easier. I know, okay, negative 5, I'm adding 5 zeros, and I'm putting my decimal between the first 2. It works every single time. So if you have like 3.01 times 10 to the 20, you're just going to add 20 zeros and put your decimal between the first 2. And that way you're not just counting as you go to the left, because sometimes that can be tedious. I don't know. Whichever way you want to do it, go for it. You just can't use a calculator on this one, unfortunately. Okay, let's talk about multiplying and dividing in scientific notation. When you multiply or divide in scientific notation, you need to be careful how you enter the problem into the calculator. The calculator follows PEMDAS. In other words, if you have 2 numbers you're dividing, let's say 1.2 times 10 to the 5th divided by 3.3 times 10 to the negative 2, it's actually going to multiply, then divide, but then it's going to multiply again because it saw that time sign. So it doesn't know that it's the scientific notation number. Now, you can do one of 2 things. You can convert the number to regular notation and do it that way, but that's a pain in the butt. All calculators have this thing called the EE button. Now, if you remember on the previous slides, it came out like one of your answers was maybe 9.21 E negative 14 or E 14. That E means times 10. Okay. So you have an EE button on your calculator if it's a scientific calculator. Now, if you don't have one on your calculator, you need to make sure you get a calculator with that on it. It will make life so much easier doing these. Okay, so I'm not even going to bother to tell you how to do it without the EE button. Now, the good thing is with times, when you're timesing everything, it doesn't matter. You can put in the calculator 3.02 times 10 caret 5 times 2.01 times 10 caret 6. It's all times. So you don't have to worry about PEMDAS. It just goes along and times everything. And you'll get the right answer. But that's a lot of things to put into the calculator. I prefer using the EE button. All you're doing is you're going to type in 3.02 EE5 times 2.01 EE6. And when you do that, you get, now you're going to get 606.0702 E11. Okay, this is not actually your answer. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's not in the right form. First off, before we go any further, we have to worry about significant digits. That's why we did the significant digits before we did this slide or this lecture. Okay, so we have 3 sig figs here, 3 sig figs here. So my answer can only have 3 sig figs. So I'm going to write down 6.07. Now, this is times 10 to the 11th. So my full answer is 6.07 times 10 to the 11th. Okay? That's how you do these. Now, as I said, if you put this in the calculator, and you can, I mean, if you don't remember the EE, you might have some difficulties on the next slide, but you can do it without the EE on this slide. I wouldn't, though. Get practice with the EE button. Okay. Now, this is the one where, actually, no, this is one that, same thing. You're going to have no problems with if you just keep on doing multiplication. But you do realize you have a -9 here. So we're not going to worry about doing it by hand. Now, if you were doing it by hand, you'd have to use the rules of exponents, which is 5 minus 9, blah, blah, blah. Don't even worry about that. I used to teach it that way, but that was before we let everybody use calculators, because I used to make sure people would do this without a calculator, but I would do simple numbers. So this one is 3.02 EE5 times 9.11 E-9. Now, this is where you do have to be careful, though. Some calculators you have to put in -9. Other calculators you have to put 9 negative. So you'll have to try and figure it out with your calculator. So my suggestion to you is stop the, well, once I give you the answer, stop the video and do it on your calculator to see if you need to put in -9 or 9 negative. And don't use the minus sign. It's got to be your calculator should have a negative sign. Okay, so when you do this, you're going to get, your answer is going to be 0.00275,122. Now, you're going to have to put this number into scientific notation, but we also have to worry about sig figs. So this has 3 sig figs, this has 3 sig figs. So my 3 sig figs are right here, and I don't have to round because I don't have to worry about those numbers. So it's going to be 2.75. Now, I'm going to take it, go 1, 2, 3. So it's times 10 to the -3. So on your calculator right now, stop the video and do this operation and see if you need to put in -9 or 9 negative. And that'll tell you, okay? And if you don't get 2.75 times 10 to the -3, or actually, if you don't get the 0.00275,122, then you did it wrong. So, okay, let's go on. Okay, now we're going to divide. And this is where you do have to use the EE. Well, you don't have to, but you got to be careful how you do it. EE is just easier. If you don't want to use that button, if you don't know where the button is, or you have a calculator that does not have that button and you don't want to get a new calculator, here's how you do it. You put the parenthesis, then put 3.02 times 10 to the fifth, or the caret or whatever your calculator does, put n parenthesis, then hit the divide by sign, then do parenthesis, 2.01 times 10 to the sixth n parenthesis. That will still give you the correct answer. If you don't have those parentheses, you're going to get the exponent is going to be much bigger or much smaller than it should be. Okay, so it's going to be wrong. You will get the wrong answer. Now, if you have the E button and you can use the EE button, I would suggest you do that. So this time we're going to type in 3.02 EE5 divided by 2.01 EE6. Now, when we do that, we get, let's see, 0.015. Okay? So now we're going to put that into scientific notation. 1, 2. So we get 1.5 times 10 to the 2. Now, can anybody figure out what's wrong with this answer? Well, if you said significant digits, you're right. We have 3 sig figs here, 3 sig figs here. We only have 2. So at this point in time, we have to add a 0 at the end because your calculator does not put zeros at the end. Even though your answer should have a 0 at the end, your calculator is like, it stops it at the last digit. So you need to write 1.50 times 10 to the 2. Okay? So just make sure you have 3 sig figs. And that's the easiest thing to do in scientific notation. If you have to make sure, if you have to add more sig figs, you just add zeros at the end. Because if you recall, zeros at the end with a decimal are significant. Okay. Okay, now the last one. 3.02 times 10 to the fifth divided by 9.11 times 10 to the negative ninth. Once again, if you don't have the EE button, make sure you are doing the parentheses. But if you do have the EE button, we're just going to do 3.02 EE5 divided by 9.11 EE negative 9. Now, when we do this one, we get, let's see, 3.02 EE5 divided by 9.11 EE negative 9. You get a huge number and then E13. So you get I'm not going to write all the, I'm not going to write all the digits down. 3.315. How many? 038. I'm going to stop there. ... E13. Okay. So that's not really the right answer. I mean, it is, but there's so many digits there. So once again, we have 3 sig figs and 3 sig figs. So we are going to stop at 3. So we're going to take this. Oops, and look, there's a 5. So it's going to be 3.32. And this is times 10 to the 13th. So times 10 to the 13th is our answer. Okay. And that's it for our multiplying, dividing, adding and subtracting. Let's do that one. I didn't do that yet. So we'll do that on the next slide. Okay. We're going to talk about adding and subtracting. And it's the same thing as when you're adding and subtracting with sig figs. We've got to pay attention to those sig figs, but we'll do that in a second. So let's go ahead and do 3.01 times 10 to the fifth plus, and I'm going to put these in parentheses so you can tell what I'm doing, 2.11 times 10 to the sixth. Now to add those, I'm going to use the calculator. I'm just going to use the EE button. And when you use the EE button, so you do 3.01 EE5 plus 2.11 E6, you get 2411000. Now we have to put this into scientific notation, but we do have to pay attention to sig figs. Now remember, adding and subtracting. Your answer can only have the same number of sig figs as the number with the least amount past the decimal. Well, here we don't have to worry about it. We got 2 places here, 2 places here. So our answer has to have 2 places past the decimal. So when I move this, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to write down 2.41 times 10 to the 6. I am not going to write down that other one because my answer can only have 2 places past the decimal. Let's try another one. So let me move the screen up a little bit. So let's do 5.9, just 5.9 times 10 to the negative 10th minus 6.885 times 10 to the negative 7. Now, I could be any numbers. It doesn't even matter what they are when you're adding and subtracting. As I said, the easiest thing to do is stick it in your calculator. Use the EE button. It helps every time. So we're going to do 5.9 EE negative 10 minus 6.885 EE negative 7. And my answer, oh, it's a negative number, but it doesn't matter. So it's negative 6. Now, I only have 1 place past the decimal here. Well, actually, let's give you what the calculator says. The calculator is negative 6.8791 E negative 7. Okay. Now, as I said, this only has 1 place past, this has 3. So we've got to go with 1 place past the decimal. So that's right there. So my answer is negative 6.9 times 10 to the negative 7. So as I said, the EE button on your calculator saves everything. It's so much easier than trying to, this one you would have to try and move one of these two. You'd have to either make the 6.885 a negative 10 or make the negative 10 into a negative 7. Either way, you're messing with trying to remember, oh, do I move left? Do I move right? Don't even worry about it. Calculator does the work for you. If you have, now, if you don't have the EE button, you should be able to put it into parentheses. I've never tried it. So try it and put in parentheses and see if you come out with that answer. And if you do, then you can use the parentheses. I said, I've just never done it before with parentheses. Should be able to, but you never know. Okay, well, that's it. So tomorrow we'll do a warm-up. And if you have any questions, we'll answer them then. See ya. Bye.